Hello, my name is Chris Boyer. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Ag and Resource Economics here at the University of Tennessee. And today I'm going to be talking about using enterprise budgets for making farm management decisions. So some of y'all may be familiar with the word budget or enterprise budget, but let's start with just a quick refresher definition. So a budget is projection of revenue, expenses, and profit per unit for decision making. Now that's a farm management textbook decision or definition, excuse me. But maybe a better way to explain this is we're projecting what our revenues and our expenses and our profits going to be for growing corn in a given field or growing soybeans on a given field. So we're trying to make a decision on a per acre basis. Budgets are set on a per acre basis of what our projected profit's going to be for planting corn or soybeans on as a part of your operation that year. So, and again, this is a projection. So this is something you're doing prior to planting, right? You're doing this in months before you're planting, and you're trying to project what your profit will be in the future, from whichever commodity you choose to produce that year. So these budgets are set for one time period, one production season. And the purpose of these is for decision making, having a fair side by side comparison between crops to grow to make a decision. So in economics, we talk about we have to allocate our scarce resources to maximize our profit. Well, your scarce resources may be land, labor, your money, your machinery. And so how do you best utilize those resources to maximize your profits? Well, enterprise budgets are ways for you to project what your profits will be from, say, corn versus soybeans. So you're going to end up planting the crop that's going to make you the most money. And we'll come back to this at the end. I think budgets are also a great tool to make you better at marketing. So they make you better at selling your crop and knowing what price you need to make money. So we'll come back to that at the very end of this. I thought it'd be good for us to start looking at what enterprise budgets are. And I've provided a link to our departmental website where we, on an annual basis, and I say we, I need to say Aaron Smith and other experts, extension state specialists and others, many others, put together these crop budgets that are tools to be used for producers across the state. So I'm going to hopefully show you guys an example of this. So here's the website that's listed in the slides. And if you look, for field crop budgets, if you go over here and you click, all of this information pops out. It gives you a guide to the 2021 Tennessee crop budgets. Lots of information there. But one thing that the place I kind of want to show you is, okay, so if we go down and we see individual budgets, here's a no-till, non-irrigated corn budget. So if we click on that, this pops up and you can see, so here is a budget that Dr. Smith and Becky Boland and others have put together. It's a representative no-till, non-irrigated corn farm for this year, 2021. And they have in here, broken down by revenue, variable expenses, and fixed cost expenses. And you can see they've plugged some numbers in here. Now, this isn't going to be fully representative of your operation specifically, but it's just to represent this type of enterprise for 2021. And you can see over here, there's a slot over here that shows your farm. And so this is a template. It's an example that could be used by you to sit down and you could pencil out what your variable expenses will be, fixed cost expenses will be. And then down here at the bottom are these break-even yields and break-even prices. And we'll talk about that there at the end. But today's discussion, I just kind of want to walk through what are the revenues, what are expenses, and what are fixed expenses, and then how do we find these break evens and how are they used? So going back to our presentation, we can see that the budgets will give you returns, profits above your variable expenses, and profits above your overall expenses. So your expenses can be broken into your variable costs and your fixed costs. Adding those up will give you your total costs. It's important to look at both your returns over your variable expenses and your returns over all of your expenses, because it gives you an indication on, are you covering your operating expenses? This is important for paying back your operating loans, and then covering your fixed costs of machinery, purchasing machinery, or any new fixed asset, fixed or long-term asset or fixed cost. These are important measurements to kind of to take and figure out how each commodity will help you cover these different expense categories. So starting with revenue, revenue is probably the hardest part to forecast. Again, we're projecting in the future in these enterprise budgets, right? You could use your historical yield data. You might could use things like forward contract or future contract prices, even looking at things like crop insurance and projected prices in crop insurance to help you have an idea of what that price would be. But revenue is essentially, let me back up. Revenue is essentially the price of the good times the quantity of the good you're producing. So your total bushels of corn times the price of corn per bushel. That's your revenue, right? That's the money coming in. That's what you're getting paid for producing. Now, yield, there's a lot of uncontrollable factors out there that can impact yield and prices. Drought, weather, other things can impact prices, droughts in other parts of the country. And so this is pretty variable and can be hard to fully estimate. Costs, on the other hand, though, are something that you have more certainty over and more control over. So variable costs are costs. So this is a kind of a textbook definition here. Costs that are directly associated with the volume of business. We'll walk through examples of this here in a second, but essentially what this means is these are costs that occur so you can produce the commodity that you're going to produce. So for example, your seed costs, your fertilizer costs, these are all costs that you have to incur to grow your corn. So they're just a cost that's directly associated with the quantity, your yield of your production. Fixed costs are just costs that occur no matter if you grow anything or not. So whether you grow anything or not, you're gonna have to pay for your tractor. Whether you grow for anything or not, you're gonna have to pay for your land. These are examples of fixed costs. So I've kind of given a few examples of variable cost: seed, fertilizer, chemicals, right? These are fairly easy. Well, I said they're easier to calculate, right? You could perhaps pick up the phone, call your provider, your seed, your salesman, and just say, hey, what's seed prices? What's fertilizer? Call a co-op, get fertilizer prices. Call whoever it may be, and you can get these input prices. So you can get an idea of what kind of your expected expenses are for that upcoming year. Machinery costs are going to be both variable expenses and fixed costs. The variable expense for machinery is going to be things like oil, fuel, repairs. These are all expenses that you have in growing your crop. Now, how you divide that out across enterprises, that can be a little more difficult. And I'm going to give you a couple ways. So one way to allocate out costs across enterprises is, so for example, you have a farm where you're growing corn and you're growing soybeans. You're buying fuel and you have repairs, you have oil expenses. So how do you divide all that up between your two enterprises, corn and soybeans? Well, you could simply do it by acres. So if 60% of your acres are in corn and 40% of your acres in soybeans, you take your total projected fuel, oil, repair expenses, and you divide it out on a per acre basis, right? So that total cost, if say, for example, it's $10,000 that year, that may be high or low, depending on how big a farm you are. 60% of that is going to go to corn, for your farm, however many acres, say you have a 1,000, so you can allocate it out to where 60% of that cost is going to go, based on those acres, and 40% will go towards the soybeans based on acres on a per acre basis. You could also divide it out by hours of machinery used. This is a little more difficult, takes a little more tedious collection of data. If you did count the hours of machinery was used on different enterprises, you could allocate it that way. So for example, if 60% of your machinery hours, are going to be on corn and 40% are going to be on soybeans, you could allocate it that way. But either way, you need to at least think through how those expenses will be split across enterprises, and acres is a reasonable way of doing that. Other variable expenses, I just want to note, and there's several others, we could walk through, but one is the labor, right? So your labor expense will vary based on the quality of labor that you need. It can vary across machinery or different technologies that you may have on your farm. Interest expense. So if you take out a loan to finance your production for that year, your interest is going to be an expense that you need to include as a variable cost expense, right? So that is increasing throughout the operating year, so production year. So you need to account for that interest expense that you might have on that operating loan. Crop insurance, and there's many others, just depending on your operation. You could have hauling, you could have custom work that needs to be done, scouting, consulting, different things like that. And that's why, I think these templates of the budgets that Dr. Smith and others put together are helpful, because they provide a long list of things that can help you figure out, how do I allocate that for my operation? So kind of moving on to fixed costs, these are things like machinery, right? It can be interest expense on that machinery. It can be insurance or tax expenses on it. It could be depreciation. It could be property taxes or non-machinery insurance, barn, anything like that could be considered a fixed cost. Land is another fixed cost that needs to be considered. So if you're renting ground, it's pretty easy. Your cash rental rate for your land is your land expense. But if you own the ground, it's important, and at least in economics, we have this idea of opportunity costs. And just a quick little refresher on opportunity costs. It's the cost you're giving up for some other action. So you landowner, you could lease out your property, right? You could rent it to someone else and receive a cash rental rate or a share crop rental rate, however you wanted to formulate that. But you're giving up that revenue in order for you to grow a crop on that property, on your field. So that's the opportunity cost. It's a cost you're giving up. And so that's an important cost to consider when building in these enterprise budgets, because it's something it's a cost something you're giving up in order to grow your corn or soybeans. So there's also another publication that Dr. Smith puts together that I want to show you. It's a survey of Tennessee cropland, irrigated, and pasture land rental rates. And this was done in 2020. 2020. And you can kind of see it breaks up by county over here. It has non-irrigated cropland. So 2019 irrigated cropland, pasture land, non-irrigated cropland. So this is sort of the average of both the years. And then you have 2020, and you can gives percent changes. So it shows how that might change. So, for example, if you're in, let's just say, Jackson County, it looks like non-irrigated cropland, the average per acre rental rate was about $82 an acre. The pasture land was 13. And then in 2020, it's gone down to about $57 per acre. So there's about a 30% decrease. So this is a helpful tool for you to see what your land is worth as far as on a rental basis as a landowner. It's also a helpful tool for those that are renting land and trying to negotiate new rental rates. Again, this isn't a complete survey of all producers of all farms, and it's likely not going to be representative of all farms because all farms vary in quality and infrastructure and things like that. But it's a piece of information to consider perhaps in making that decision. And then another opportunity cost to consider in these budgets is your management, your labor expense. So you, the producer, you are knowledgeable, you have expertise. You could be doing something else. Instead of farming, you could lease that ground and maybe get a job doing something else, right? So it's important to include your management expense. You're in there. Labor expense is easy, right? Your hired labor expense, but your personal time, that's something important to really consider in looking at these budgets. Particularly, again, we're allocating our scarce resources to maximize some profit. Labor is going to be your time is a valuable resource. And so making sure that you're considering that type of expense in there is important. So these will give you your economic profits to all of your expenses, including your opportunity costs. So what do we do with these budgets? That's kind of the question I was hoping to lead to in this discussion. How do we use them? We can pencil them out. And we can look at, okay, here's the corn profit versus soybean profit for this year. But there's another step we can do. We can do this break-even analysis. And again, if you, going back to our budget example here, you can see at the bottom, there's these two break-even tables, break-even yields and break-even prices. And they have kind of different variety, different numbers for yields, different numbers for variable costs. And so anyways, I want to kind of show you how these things are done. So a break-even price is just your total cost of production divided by your yield. So you as a producer, you could call your input providers and get project out a pretty good idea of what your total cost is going to be for growing corn. And then you've grown corn before. So you might have an idea of what kind of yield you'd expect in a good year, in a bad year, and an average year. And so you divide out your total cost divided by your yields, and you get a break-even price. And this is the price you need in order to be profitable. Anything above your break-even price, you'll be profitable. Anything below your break-even price, you'll not be profitable. You can do the same thing with quantity. So you could say, okay, break-even yield. So you take that total cost and you divide it by, say you've purchased crop insurance and you have a projected price, or you have some sort of price floor set. You have a good idea of what your price will be, and you divide your total cost by your price. That's going to give you a break-even quantity, a break-even yield. So you have to have a yield of this amount to be profitable, or otherwise, if it's below that, you'll not be profitable. So let's go through some examples of this. So here is an example I pulled from USDA, and it's kind of a breakdown of corn expenses projected for this area of the United States. So the projected total cost is going to be approximately $638 per acre. If you look at the breakdown of all these expenses, so this is the total cost. This is going to include variable and fixed, right? It has fertilizer, $145 an acre, seeds, $105 an acre, family and hired labor, $50 an acre, your land price, assuming a $95 per acre rental rate, machinery, and you can kind of see all these small, operating later, operating expense, crop insurance, repairs, oil, fuel, filters, chemicals, and it kind of is a pie chart of showing, where your big expenses are. And this type of information is helpful to look at because it helps you to see how, when you have to control costs, where are the areas that are the biggest expenses of your operation, and how do I control what parts of my expenses do I need to focus on trying to shrink down to better control my costs. So you take your total cost and you divide it. So for a break even price, and you divide it by your total bushels. So I set this chart up here. I have, let's call it the worst case scenario, the average scenario, and the best scenario, right? So on a average scenario, you're thinking you're going to make 170 bushels an acre. Worst case, you really think you can make 150 bushels an acre. The best case, you make 190 bushels an acre, right? And so this will vary across your operation, across farms. So if you took the total cost, that's $638, and you divided it by your worst case scenario yield of 150 bushels per acre, you get a break-even price of $4.25. So what that means is if you can sell your corn for greater than $4.25 a bushel, that operation's that enterprise will be profitable. So currently, corn prices, let's say the price today is $5 a bushel, $5.50 a bushel, and your break-even price in a year where you have a really bad yield is going to be $4.25 a bushel. That's a good spot to be, right? Because now that your break-even price is lower than the price you could be expecting to get at harvest. And an average yield of 170 bushels an acre, it goes down, right, to $3.75 a bushel. So again, if you're looking at that current price of say $5.50 a bushel, and your break-even price is $3.75 a bushel, then that your break-even price is lower than what the market price is going to be. So you're going to get a higher price than your break-even price. So you'll make money. The scenario you want to avoid is if you look at the market and it says the current price is $3.50 for corn and your break-even price is $3.75, that means you will not make money. Your projections are showing that corn will not make money. So you want your break-even price to be lower than the market price, or you want the price you receive at harvest or at selling to be greater than your break-even price. So let's, and here's another example. I did it, but I changed it. I said, let's talk about the worst, average, and best case scenarios for prices. And so this is again, total cost divided by total bushels here. And so, or actually, oh man, I need to change that. It should say total cost divided by total price, or by price. But your total cost there of $638 a bushel, you divide that by $6 a bushel. So that's the best case scenario. And you have to make 106 bushels per acre to be profitable. You look at the price right now and you see $5 a bushel, and you divide your total projected expense of $638 an acre by $5 a bushel. What it's telling you is you have to make at least 128 bushels an acre to be profitable. And in worst case scenario, say corn prices drop and it's $4 a bushel. If you took your total expenses, the $638 a bushel or an acre, and you divided it by $4 a bushel, that means you need to make 160 bushels an acre to be profitable. So these are helpful to identify thresholds and scenarios of prices and yields, so you know if this is going to be a profitable enterprise or not. So similar type scenario with soybeans, projected price here of $486 an acre. You can kind of see the pie chart of expenses. Again, this is kind of a helpful way of identifying cost centers where you need to, or areas where you need to maybe control costs a little better or reduce costs. So again, have this worst case, average case, and best case scenario. You took your total cost and you divided it by the total bushels down here for the, and again, total cost per acre by your total bushels per acre for the different scenarios. And you can see how as you produce more, your break-even price continues to increase. So let's look at this best case scenario here. Your total cost, you divide that by, you think in the best case scenario, you're going to make 58 bushels an acre, 56 bushels an acre of beans. That means your break-even price is about $8.68 a bushel. Now, if you look at the current market, prices are about $14 a bushel. That's a good thing, right? Your break-even price is lower than what you're projecting to sell your beans at whenever you're going to sell. So again, it's a good thing to identify, and it's a good thing to do these kind of sensitivity analysis to show different yields, because again, we don't know exactly what yield is going to do. We don't know what the weather is going to do, but in building out the different scenarios, we can be prepared for, you may have a scenario where in the worst case scenario, it's not going to be profitable. So maybe you avoid planting that crop that year. That's why these sensitivities can be so educational in making those decisions. Similarly, I did the same thing, for prices. So best case scenario, you're going to get $15 a bushel. If you take that total cost per acre and you divide it by 15 bushels per acre, it gives you an indication of somewhere between 30 to 35 bushels an acre is going to give you a break-even yield. And you do the same for your average price scenario and the worst case price scenario. You can see as prices are lower, you have to produce more to make more money at the same cost, right? At the same cost. So connecting this back to marketing. If you know the current harvest price or selling price, or you've bought crop insurance and you have an idea of what the what your price is going to be, you're locking in some sort of floor of a price. When you go to sell that crop and you know what your break even is, it helps you to know I'm making money at this price, right? Because it shows the importance of controlling those costs. By keeping costs low, we lower our break-even price. And that helps us when we're marketing to know, hey, $5 bushel corn, that's profitable for me. But if you're not controlling costs and you're not doing these break-even analysis, you may not know if $5 a bushel corn is profitable for you or not. You may think that's a good price, I'm going to take it. But you may not have any, understanding on, did I make money? And so that's why it's important to consider this type of information when you're making these marketing decisions, because it's going to inform you, was that a profitable sale or not? What's a profitable price for me to sell at? And you can make a great marketing decision and sell at a really high price. But if you really have no foundation for knowing your costs, knowing those break-even prices, it's really hard to know your profitability of that price. So again, it's my connection back to marketing. I think understanding these enterprise budgets, and while they're imperfect and they're projections into the future, at least having that type of information when you're making these decisions on the front end of growing, but then on the back end and marketing, is helpful to make sure that you remain profitable in the long term. So with that, thank you for your time. Here's my information. If you have any questions, I wish you all the best, and please let me know if I can ever be any assistance for you. Take care.